You're listening to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please join us on Patreon.
Welcome back to The Heart of You. Today's a really big episode for me. This episode, I'm going to be telling you my entire awakening story. So many people have asked me how it is that I can have so many talents in the Akashic Records and how it is that I'm accessing all of this information from my spirit team, from the universe, from divine source energy. And how is it that I know all of this information? The answer is very simple. It is in my awakening story. And no, I was not born with this ability. There are many people out there in the world who have been born with these abilities. So from birth, they knew they were a medium, or they knew they could see the future or past lives or whatever it happens to be. And I should clarify, we're all born with these gifts. It's a matter of whether or not we are able to cultivate them in this lifetime or remember. Of course, when we're children and when we're just born, we're still sort of connected to the divine. And so we do know those things. We do have those abilities, but they do fade as time goes on. So maybe as of the age of 2 or 4, you start to lose that connection. Some people that doesn't happen. Some people it does. For me, definitely did. The good thing about that is I don't have to tell you my entire life story today. I'll start with a little background first. I grew up in an incredibly religious Catholic household. Both of my parents were raised Catholic, my father being from Iraq, being from just north of Baghdad. We are Chaldeans, which are Roman Catholics from the region. And my mother is French, Polish, and German, and Roman Catholic as well. Now, my father was not super religious and later on in his life became an atheist or agnostic. He kind of wavered between the two over the course of his lifetime. My mom, to this day, is still very devout in her beliefs within the Catholic Church. Growing up, I went to Catholic school, I went to church, I did the whole thing. I never really resonated with a lot of the information because there was so much duality within the information. And at the time when I was a kid and a teenager, I didn't realize why it didn't really resonate with me. I just knew that it didn't. I do remember spending time with my sister when we were in church. Like, we'd be laughing and joking and doing things to the point where my mom would always have to yell at us to stop joking around, stop playing about while we were in church, that sort of thing. So it wasn't until I was 16 where I really came to the realization that Catholicism and religion in general was just not for me. And we just so happened to have a visiting priest in our parish, and he was very, very conservative. And he came to one of my classes and basically said, you know, if you don't believe in Jesus, if you don't believe in this, and that, then you're all going to hell. And I was like, okay. I think that's a load of crap. And so I basically kind of detached myself from the Catholic teachings because of that particular experience. Now, there were other experiences that sort of led up to that, but ultimately that was the one experience that sort of made me say, okay, you know what? I have friends that are other religions. I have friends that don't believe in religion, and they're perfectly wonderful people. So you can't tell me that they're going to hell. So that started that particular journey for me. Fast forward throughout my teen years and my 20s, and I would say sort of the beginning part of my 30s. I basically went through a lot of searching and not really finding much of what I wanted in a spiritual life. Now, I can definitely say I have always believed in a higher power of some sort, but you know, whether you wanted to call it the universe or whatever it was, I didn't really know exactly what it was. But I always did know that we were connected in some way, all of us, to divine source energy, but didn't really know exactly how. So throughout my late teens, my 20s and early 30s, I was basically a little rebellious goth girl. I was going to nightclubs like 5 days a week. I was smoking, I was drinking. That was basically what I did for those couple of decades. So I did not really explore too much into spirituality. I had gotten a couple of readings in the past. So obviously being in the whole goth industrial scene, there were a lot of people in general who practiced, either witchcraft or, claimed to practice witchcraft, whatever it was. And also that scene does attract a lot of people who are psychic or have certain sort of gifts. So I do remember having a party one year and there were a lot of people at my house. I think I had like 120 people at my house. And there was this one woman who happened to be giving readings. And I sat down and I decided to get a reading from her really briefly. It was towards the end of the night. I had already been drinking a considerable amount. So the reading itself was probably not the best time to get something like that, but I did, and so that was the first time I had gotten a reading. It wasn't until a few years later that I actually called that woman again and asked her if she would give me an actual proper reading, where I was not drinking and that I was actually focused and asking questions that I wanted to know the answers to. So I got that reading from her. I had just moved to Philadelphia at the time. It was 2004, and I was miserable. I was miserable in Philadelphia. I needed to get out of Chicago at the time. I knew I did, but then I moved to Philadelphia and I was horribly, horribly depressed and just couldn't handle my life. And so I decided to get a session from her, and I remember getting the session, and that was the very first time I had met one of my guardian angels and one of my spirit guides. The session itself, I remember very specifically because some of the things she was saying really did resonate, but then other things I don't think I was ready to hear yet. So she had given me 3 of the past lives that I had had, and they were very basic past lives that she had given me, and I think it was designed that way by my guides simply because they knew I was not ready to take in this information yet. This was sort of the entryway or the gateway, if you will, that introduced me to the information, introduced me to the fact that there are past life readings out there that somebody can actually read your energy and see where you're going and where you are in the present moment. So I would say that the reading itself and the experience was quite good. I just was not in a particular position to be able to receive all of the information just yet. And it's funny because I do have the recording of that reading on cassette tape, if you can imagine that. And I haven't listened to it probably since I had that reading. And one of these days I'm going to get it converted and I'll listen to it again because I'd be super curious to hear what the reading said and how much it actually resonated with everything that transpired. Fast forward to a few more years and I'm back in Chicago, and essentially, I was out with some girlfriends. We went out for a weekend and they all wanted to get tarot readings. And I decided, well, there's no way that I'm going to get a tarot reading from somebody who I don't know, because I wanted to make sure that they were legitimate readers. Okay. So this was back when I was like, oh, I want to make sure they're real, Well, okay. So yeah, are there people out there who maybe claim that they can read tarot or claim that they can see the future or whatever it is, and they can't? Sure. Of course, there are people out there that are like that. But I would say that more times than not, if you get a reading from somebody and it doesn't resonate, it's probably because you just don't resonate with that particular person versus they don't know what they're doing. So all my friends got their tarot readings, and I essentially was like, you know what? No, I'm going to wait until we get back to Chicago. And I'm going to research and I'm going to find somebody who's, really, really good at doing readings. So I did. So I went home and did some research, and I found this gentleman named Patrick O'Brien, who is living in Chicago, and he had been doing readings for the Chicago Police Department to help find criminals and solve crimes. And I was like, that sounds kind of cool. Okay, so he sounds kind of legitimate. So why don't I go and book a session with him? So I did. And I went to his house, and basically he just rattled off information. I didn't even ask him a single question, I don't think, until the very end of the session. I sat down, he just started rattling off information. So this was 2009, and basically started telling me that I would be going to Africa, that I would be going to Paris, that I would be traveling to all these places. He listed off a whole list of countries, told me that I would be planning incredibly large parties. Fast forward to 2013, and I started planning Le Dîner en Blanc, which is the pop-up dinner party where everyone wears white and converges on a secret location. Yeah, I started planning those and continued to do so until 2019. And then started talking about my mom and my father, and started telling me all of this information about them, which was completely 100% accurate. He then told me that I was psychic, and he said, "Did you know that you're psychic and you need to really start writing some things down?" And I said, "What are you talking about? Like, what? I have no idea what you're talking about." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, you're really psychic. And he's like, "And you need to start developing that gift." And I was like, "Okay, whatever." Like, I didn't know what to do with that information. So I left that reading. I thought it was a really great reading. And that sort of got me in the mood, so to speak, to start doing a little bit more research, maybe start getting other readings. So then the other reading I got that year was a Vedic astrology reading. And overall, I did not necessarily resonate with the Vedic astrology, but the one thing that he said to me was, "Oh, so your design career is going to be very, very successful until you hit about the age of 50, in which case you are going to become a spiritual teacher." And I laughed out loud. I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, that's hilarious. I can't even imagine why on earth I would ever want to do that." So, yeah. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to leave that there. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so a little background on my sister, and I'll tell you why this is important in a moment. So my sister, she started her spiritual awakening basically when she was 18. So hers started much, much younger than mine. And so she started down the path of yoga, and she took courses in order to teach Ayurveda. She studied under Deepak Chopra, like all of these things, right? And so meanwhile, she's giving me books, she's telling me things, she's kind of, helping me along the path, if you will, without me actually being willing to do so. So she would give me books occasionally. She would tell me things, just sharing her experiences. And the one thing I do have to say is that I'm very appreciative for her in that way, because she never quite pushed. She didn't push me into any of it. She just kind of presented information to me. And if I was ready to receive that information, then I did. If not, then I was able to leave it. She's 4 years older than I am. So, I had been getting, little snippets of her journey here and there for quite some time. So I knew kind of what this was, but I really didn't. I knew it from her perspective of what she was telling me she was going through, but you really can't know this journey until you're on it. And once you're on the journey, then you're like, "Oh, okay, now I understand. I get it now." And it's just not something that can be described. Fast forwarding to just before my big kick in the butt spiritual awakening, I had just broken up with a long-term boyfriend, and I started getting some major signs from the universe. And this was the first time I had really recognized some really big signs from the universe. And I was kind of like, and I mean, they were so loud, I could not ignore them. I could not ignore them as signs. So even if I tried, there was no possible way I would have been able to. The signs were not particularly clear, but I think it was just sort of the precursor to giving me information that I needed at the time. So I started working with signs and started looking up signs, started looking up dreams. Now, dreams were always something that sort of permeated my experience. So I would look up dream meanings and dream signs quite often. Are you looking for a new book to read? Because I know I always am. Head to Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio with your host, Jennifer Garrity, as she interviews fascinating authors that have a French connection. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. So after having those experiences with the signs and getting more sort of like vivid dreams and all of those things, the universe pointed me in the direction of my twin flame. Now, I did an episode about twin flames a few episodes ago, so if you want to go back and listen to that, you can. So I'm not going to go into the whole definition of what a twin flame is or anything like that. I'm just going to talk about it in terms of how this affected me in my spiritual awakening process. So I met this person, and you have to understand that the background for me and dating has been very much one of when I liked somebody, it was, I very much like put everything into it. But the second I felt like they weren't stepping up or that they were not contributing or they weren't meeting me halfway or something like that, like I would basically either end it or it would be sort of a mutual ending or whatever happened. So I was not somebody who really likes to stick around in relationships if they're not working. I'm pretty much, at the time, I was the person that was very quick to basically run away or just kind of, cut my losses and say, okay, you know what, I'm out. So that bit of information is incredibly important for sort of what's to come. So I meet this person and immediately I knew there was something about him that I was connected to. Now, since I was a very young girl, I had this sort of knowing and this like almost like a pit in my stomach that like I knew that there was somebody out there for me and I didn't know why. Like I didn't know why I felt this pull. Like, of course, yeah, we grow up in sort of fairy tale land thinking that everybody has their prince, but it wasn't that. It wasn't about like, oh, I want to find my soulmate or my prince or whoever it happens to be. It was more like a feeling of knowing that I was connected to somebody, even though maybe at the time and, when I was a little girl, like I didn't know that that's what that was. So the first time I met him, he actually had a girlfriend. So I didn't even think twice about it because I had very much lived my whole life with a very, very strict anti-cheating stance, given my upbringing and things I experienced in my childhood. I acknowledged the connection that I had with him, but I didn't really take it any further as far as giving it any more thought or anything else like that. Moving forward to the next year, and I ended up seeing this person again. It turns out that he was single at the time. So we developed a rapport and we started communicating a little bit more often. We started texting a lot more often and emailing all the time. And we built up this friendship. By 2015, I saw him again, and that is when our romantic connection started. Now, here's the crazy part. Our romantic connection only lasted a month. Literally a month. It may have been like just shy of a month. And when we were together, it was great, but there was still something that was, I don't know, something was off about it, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. After that month, he ended things, and I didn't understand why, but I will get to that at a later time. So he ended things, and I was devastated, like more devastated than I had ever been in my whole life in regards to relationships. This was super, super bizarre because I had never been this devastated over somebody that I had only been in a romantic relationship with for less than a month. Back then, I would not get that attached that quickly. So it was actually really kind of alarming to me. So, of course, my first instinct was to rail against it and say, okay, cool, never going to see this person again. I'm going to make sure that that never happens, that we're never going to see each other. We're not going to communicate. We're not going to none of this is going to happen ever again. And so that was sort of what I was planning on doing. Well, the universe had other plans for me because I'm not joking. Talk about signs, like for the next, well, actually, several years, I was getting signs of him like you wouldn't believe. And I mean, these are undeniable signs, like signs upon signs, meaning that it wasn't just one sign. It would be like multiple signs showing up in the same place. I was actually kind of angry at this. It made me really mad because I wanted to forget about him. I wanted him out of my life. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And the universe was like, nope, you have to keep him in your life. And I was just like, no. And that's what jump-started my giant, huge dark night of the soul. So the dark night of the soul is a really big part of all of the spiritual awakenings that you have. And I say all of the spiritual awakenings because it's an ongoing process. It's not something where you just, oh, I'm awake now, and that's it. It's a constant process. So when people say, oh, I had my dark night of the soul, I'm like, oh, that's great. How many have you had? Oh, well, just one. Oh, okay. Well, you'll have more. Trust me, you'll have more because it doesn't just come out all in one period of time. My first dark night of the soul, I spent a better part of 6 months doing nothing but sitting on my balcony, crying, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and doing nothing, basically. Of course, I did my job. I, did the work that I needed to do and that sort of thing. But I was basically a non-functional human being. What actually got me out of it was my sister. So she had called me one day and said, hey, I just met this really great psychic at this psychic fair that I went to. And I don't know, I just feel like you would really benefit to talk to her. I made an appointment with her. And keep in mind that I still have no idea what a twin flame is. And in fact, this reader that I ended up getting multiple readings from, she did not mention twin flames either. I didn't find out about twin flames until basically like a year and a half after that. Essentially, she had said to me when we talked about this particular gentleman that he was an incredibly good guy. She's like, he's a good guy. He has a really good soul. And I said, I know. But there's something about what's going on right now, and it just doesn't feel right. And it's, it feels like, he's not showing up and, all of these things. So there was, a lot of back and forth regarding that. She was telling me what I knew in my heart to be true, which was I knew this person on a soul level. And I knew that in his soul, he was this beautiful, pure, divine person, like we all are. We're all divine people, but this particular connection to him, I knew that it was different for me. I was just not ready to accept it. I was not ready to accept the fact that I was connected to this person. Slowly but surely, I crawled my way out of my dark night of the soul. And I was able to finally come to terms with the fact that, okay, maybe we're not going to be together at this moment. Whatever it happens to be, I just need to continue moving forward. I got out of the dark night of the soul and proceeded to feel better because I was able to work through some of the shadows that were sort of lurking in the back of my subconscious. So then fast forward to the following year and I saw him again. And when I saw him, it was a totally different energy. So we had a great time together. We traveled together, But keep in mind, we were not together at this time in any sort of romantic sense. We became really good friends and we were connected in a really beautiful and deep way. And it was then that I found out that he had a girlfriend. And so the reason why he ended things with me is because his girlfriend had broken up with him during the time that we were together. And then basically they got back together as soon as he had ended things with me, essentially. Well, and the really beautiful part is that I then came to find out later, much, much later, that his girlfriend has been a really big part of our spiritual lives. We actually incarnated together knowing that this situation would happen because we kind of signed up for all of it. It's really beautiful to now see that, but at the time I absolutely did not see that, and it was really frustrating for me because I knew that this person and I were sort of meant to be together, but I was not seeing evidence of that in real life. So it made me feel a little crazy. That was that first inkling of that psychic nature that I had. It started really permeating throughout the whole rest of my life, where I started seeing things that were going to be happening. But then if they didn't happen, I started feeling nuts because, like, why aren't they happening? Like, I have this intuition that this is going to happen. Well, what I didn't realize was that time is our worst enemy. Like, essentially, I was expecting these things to happen. Oh, okay, well, I got the intuition, so it's going to happen right now. Well, no, the universe might end up giving us that intuition because they want us to know about it so we stay on our path. But maybe it's not going to happen for quite a long time. I had to go through various bouts of feeling crazy and doing various things like frantically pulling tarot cards, trying to figure out what the answer is, because clearly what my intuition was saying was not lining up with what my reality was. And that was like sort of the process in which I learned how to use tarot, because it was definitely like a trial and error type of thing. It's like I would get an intuition and I would get confirmation from the cards and I'm like, okay, cool, that's going to happen. And then, you know, let's say it did happen in the real world, which many times it did. So I would say, okay, hey, is it in my highest good to do this? And I'm, you know, sort of in that space and asking the cards, and the cards are like, yeah, go for it. And so I would do it and it would work out great and everything's fine. Okay, cool. So I was able to get a lot of confidence in my intuition and doing the tarot cards with getting that sort of validation and confirmation that what my intuition was telling me was true. That was not, however, correct when it came to my twin flame. There were all sorts of signs that they were giving me throughout the course of this journey. And this journey, as I said, has been going on for now it's like 9 years at this time. So the journey is very much about your spiritual awakening. So it's about my spiritual awakening. It's about his spiritual awakening. Now, his spiritual awakening has been slow. It's been incredibly, incredibly slow because he's very, very stubborn and he's not actually doing the work, I guess, that he is supposed to be doing on an energetic basis. So it leaves me in a place where I am basically moving forward and I'm moving on with my life. And if my twin flame does in fact start doing the work and actually, you know, comes to me as a fully whole being who loves himself and who is able to be an energetic match, then of course I will be there for him and with him. But I'm not going to stop living my life in order to wait for him. I have made the decision to move forward with my life and possibly date other people. And I've actually went into my Akashic records and asked my guides if they could send me a soulmate. So it's a really big deal. It's a super big deal because you feel this connection to somebody for such a long time, even before you even came to this planet. And to have free will is about exactly that. So they have free will to do whatever they want. And he has made the free will choice to not be in my life. So that is a decision I have to respect. That is sort of the end of the story. The middle bits are the good part.
There's a reason why Paris is considered one of the most romantic places in the world. Lily Heisey of Romancing in Paris explores all of these little hidden places where you can experience the love and the romance of the City of Light. You can find Romancing in Paris at parisundergroundradio.com.
We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. Because throughout the course of this 9-year period, I expanded my knowledge, my spirituality, my spiritual gifts by leaps and bounds. If you spoke to people who knew me back, before I met my twin and then going through the dark night of the soul, you would probably hear many people say that I'm pretty much a completely different person. A lot of that period of time was working through all of the wounding, all of the shadows, all of the things that I really needed to look at. Throughout the course of my experience with my twin flame, I was able to really be shown the areas in my life in which I was abandoning myself by accepting something less than what I deserve, by accepting behavior that was not great from people, that was basically turning my attention towards things that were not for my highest good. And it was because I felt like I deserved it. I deserved to be, either punished or that I didn't deserve love. All of these things were pointing me in the right direction. So what happened during that entire time? Well, I lost friends. I lost jobs. I lost all kinds of things. And that is 100% normal on the spiritual awakening, because what happens is that as you raise your frequency and your vibration, you stop resonating with certain things. So, for example, a couple years in after my dark night of the soul, I started becoming incredibly sensitive to, let's say, violence on television. So one of my favorite shows was The Walking Dead, and I couldn't watch it anymore. It energetically made me feel like crap. It was almost like I would have a hangover and I couldn't shake it. It was like this disgusting energy that was just stuck to me and I couldn't get rid of it. I had to stop watching things like that. I had to stop eating certain foods. I had to, stop hanging out with certain people. Like, there were a lot of things that I had to go through. And might I add, throughout the course of this process, I had many, many dark nights of the soul. Yes, a lot of them were triggered by my twin flame, but that it was meant to be that way. I was meant to trigger things in him. He was meant to trigger things in me. Going through this process, each time I went through a dark night of the soul, it became shorter and I was able to have more tools and I was able to seek help. And there was an entire year between 2016 and 2017 that I literally did nothing but watch YouTube videos on spiritual awakening and twin flames, or read books or listen to audiobooks, whatever it happens to be. And then I did that again in 2018, where I was just voracious about reading everything that I could. And it was during that time that I discovered the Akashic Records. So it was funny because in 2016 was when I first found out about twin flames. And then right around the same time is when I first heard about the Akashic Records. And I got a book from a gentleman named Ernesto Ortiz. And I read the book cover to cover and I was like, this really resonates with me. And I think that I want to do this. And I didn't really move forward with it until the timing was right, because my guides were telling me, hey, this is just to prepare you. And when the timing is right, it's all going to fall into place. So I was like, cool. So keep in mind, at this time, I still had my spiritual training wheels, if you will. And what I mean by that is that I had coaches, I had people that I spoke to in regards to my astrology. I had help. I had a lot of help. In a couple of upcoming episodes, I interview Lee and Sherry Patterson, who are two of my coaches who helped me through so much of this. Their episode is coming up this season. And then also I'm interviewing Dove and Nicole of Twin Flame Revolution, and they are going to be on the show at the end of season 4. And we're going to talk about addiction as it pertains to the spiritual awakening. So that's something to look forward to towards the end of the year. So I had a great deal of help at various different points in time. And the really beautiful part is when I was getting help, Dove and Nicole were the first coaches that I hired, and they were exactly what I needed at that exact right time. And then when I hired Lee and Sherry, they were the exact coaches I needed at the exact right time. And it's because they really work with energy and they work with you in a very, very different way. Both sets of coaches were incredibly valuable. It's just I needed 2 different perspectives in order to get me where I needed to be. I highly recommend when you know finally that you are on your spiritual awakening, I highly, highly recommend that you get a coach, that you get somebody who can basically walk you through the process, who can hold space for you, who can listen to you, who can hold you in your tears, in your frustration, in your anger, in all of those lower energies that you are meant to feel so you can transmute them. And of course, if you need that help, I am definitely here. So that is why I'm doing this podcast. That is why I am doing this work, because I am really passionate about helping people through their spiritual awakening process. Because in the beginning, I didn't know that's what was happening. And I didn't have help because I didn't know what to ask for, who to ask. I didn't know where to get the information. I knew nothing. It can be so much easier if you know and then you reach out for help as soon as possible. Now, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I went to a therapist for a good part of 10 years. And it was really wonderful because she was actually, now that I look back on it, part of my spiritual awakening process as well. Because not only was she my therapist, but she practiced what you call contemplative therapy. So it uses mindfulness and meditation, body scans, all kinds of things like that in order to help you get over some of the childhood traumas or help you get past certain things. And even though I didn't really understand it at the time, but she was very much preparing me for what I would be going through and what I would be experiencing in the decades to come. So if you do decide to go to a therapist, make sure that they are somebody who understands energetics, who understands spirituality and what a spiritual awakening is and what it is you're going through. Because if you're just going to a regular traditional therapist, they're not going to be addressing the core issues that you really need to look at, which are the spiritual aspects of the awakening process. I know I'm jumping around a lot, but that's kind of what it's like. It's actually exactly what it's like when you're going through an awakening. Nothing is linear. You are essentially going from one piece of information to one piece of trauma to a dark night of the soul to great clarity and realization, and then right back down into that shadow. It's not linear. It is kind of all over the place. When I say that I've had many dark nights of the soul, it's very true. I have dark nights of the soul still to this day. But the really great thing is when I have one today, it is maybe an hour or maybe a few minutes. I think the longest I've had recently was probably a full day where I threw a tantrum, was really upset and crying. And also the other biggest difference is I don't have those vices anymore. So I don't gravitate towards cigarettes anymore to, basically, satiate me or make me feel better. I don't gravitate towards sugar and sweets like I used to. I still love coffee. I do love coffee, but I'm off caffeine. So I do drink 1 cup of decaf per day and that's it. But it is not emotionally tied like it used to be. So I can tell you that when we talk about the addictions with Dove and Nicole in next season, it's a big deal in the spiritual awakening process because every single addiction that you have is tied directly to an emotional place where you are abandoning yourself. So for me, when you talk about the lungs, it's grief. I was in such deep grief, not only for what had happened with my twin, but it went back way further than that. It went back to my father. It went back to past lives. It went back to a lot of stuff. So I was holding on to that grief so tightly that I was stuffing it down. And basically that is what people do when they're smoking. They're stuffing down their grief. So the next time you see somebody smoking, don't judge them. Look at them from the standpoint of, wow, that person must be in some really deep grief, and try to have some compassion. The other thing that's a really big hallmark of going through your spiritual awakening is the universe sort of clearing your schedule to allow you the time and the space to learn the things that you need to learn. You will find that maybe you will lose a job and somehow you're financially supported, but yet you have all this time to be able to do the research and to go within and do your meditation and cultivate a practice or take a training in Reiki or learn about crystals or whatever it happens to be. If you really listen to the universe and follow where the universe is pointing, you will be able to get through this much, much quicker and much, much easier. Now, it is not something that you rush through. I'm not saying that you can rush through it, but I definitely went through it kicking and screaming. I don't think I went through it the easy way. I kept on having to experience the same things over and over and over again before I finally got it and realized, oh, that is something that I need to look at within myself. Okay, cool. So that's, I guess, where I'm going to go next. The other thing I want to address as well is the element of losing stuff like jobs and friends and money and all sorts of things throughout the course of your spiritual awakening process. Now, it is completely different for everyone. So if you have abundance blocks, then your money might be affected. I don't have abundance blocks. I never really have. So my abundance stayed pretty consistent throughout my spiritual awakening, but I did lose in other ways. So my biggest focus had always been on love and relationships. And so I basically lost a lot of those. Like I lost a lot of friendships. I didn't have the love of my twin flame. So I felt very unloved. I felt very alone. There were a lot of times where I felt like I am completely alone in this and nobody understands what I'm going through. And when I did reach out for help, like I said, and found community, that definitely helped incredibly to know that there are other people that were going through this same problem or the same process. When you do lose people, whether they be family members or friends or significant others, I have coached a lot of people who have gotten divorces after their spiritual awakening, and that's meant to happen. Because whether that person was there for a reason to just push you onto your path, or whether they were just a decision that you made and it needed to be course corrected, either way, those relationships are meant to end. And it is because you need to sort of clear out the things that no longer serve you in order for the universe to bring you those beautiful, bright new things that are fully aligned with where you are now versus where you were. So if you are in a relationship at the moment and you keep on complaining about how toxic it is and how horrible it is, and yet you're saying, well, why isn't the universe sending me something better? Well, maybe it's because the universe isn't going to send you something until you clear the decks, until you get rid of what you need to get rid of first. That can be really scary sometimes. It can be super scary to just take that leap. So for me, it was, my job. So like I said, I had been a designer for so long, and I still do design work from time to time, but I was really losing clients left and right. And it had nothing to do with me and the work that I was doing. It just so happens that, things were closing, people were shutting down, all sorts of things. And then pandemic hit. Well, the entire trade show industry went away entirely. It was sort of that kick in the pants I needed to really start my spiritual business that I knew I needed to start. But, my guides and my angels kept on saying, oh, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. It's not the right time. And finally, it was the right time. And as soon as it was the right time, everything just fell into place.
Are you fascinated with all of the different terroirs or the various different regions of France and the cheese and the wine and all of the gastronomy that comes from each territory? If so, this is the podcast for you. It is the Terroir Podcast with Caroline Connor and Emily Monaco. Head to parisundergroundradio.com.
We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. It's a really good example of how you can have something that you're holding on so tightly to that you don't want to let go of, and then all of a sudden you make space, or in my case, the universe made space for me. Because that's the other thing. The universe will step in sometimes and give you a swift kick in the butt if you're not on your path, and they'll make things happen. They will actually make you lose jobs, wives, husbands, you name it. You'll lose it if you're not willingly doing so of your own volition. That is only if it is in your highest good. If this is part of your soul purpose and your soul path for you to either not have this job anymore or not be in this relationship or whatever it happens to be. And the universe is like, yep, okay, cool. So you're working with your angels, you're working with your guides, you're asking them for help. Okay, cool. So you're asking for help. You better be careful what you wish for because they're going to give it to you. So if, let's say I'm asking for, this beautiful romantic connection that I can be aligned with, what might that look like? Well, that might not look like just this bright, shining person just showing up in my life. There might be some other things that I have to do first in order for that person to come into my life, right? So one of the other things that my guides had been telling me throughout the course of my awakening is that the reason why they were kind of keeping me from dating a lot of people throughout the last, 2-3 years is because they needed me focused 100% on my spiritual awakening and the work that I'm doing. They felt that basically if I were to date somebody, that basically all of my energy would be going towards that person or the relationship, and it would sort of distract me from what I am meant to be doing. So now I'm getting intuitions that are saying to me that, yes, I can now start dating because I have done a majority of the work that I need to do thus far. Of course, there's always going to be more work to do, but for the most part, I've gotten to where I need to get to in order to now pull in another person to start doing work together. And that's the other really beautiful thing, is that the universe is going to send you people that are going to work with you, with your energy, with your spiritual awakening, with everything. So I have been sent so many beautiful people in my life throughout the course of this process. It can be a very isolating experience to go through this, but I have to tell you that the rewards of having your soul family come into your life and your existence is so wonderful. It's so beautiful to meet people that that you've met and you've known on a soul level in so many previous lifetimes, people that are on the same path that you are, people who are doing the same work that you are doing. And it's really wonderful to finally meet those people. You're going to meet those people when it's the right time. So if you haven't met those people yet, it's okay. There will be a time where they will cross your path. Now, I may have addressed this in one of the other episodes, but I'm going to mention it again. The transition that I made from Chicago to France to Paris was one that was also divinely guided, and it was definitely part of my spiritual awakening process. Moving to a different country is sometimes often that thing that you need in order to help you to wake up. I had been in Chicago. Like I said, I had been doing all of the reading and the voracious consuming of information, meditations and classes and all kinds of things. And I felt very isolated because I was spending a ton of time alone. I had like 2 other friends who understood the journey and were kind of going through it as well. But for the most part, I spent a lot of my time alone, which if you would have known me in my 20s, you would have been like, oh my God, that's crazy. Because I was one of those people when I first got my apartment in Chicago where I couldn't stand to be alone. I had to be on the phone 24/7 with somebody because I couldn't handle being on my own. And I couldn't handle being by myself and not having companionship. And to go from that place to where I was, which is being super comfortable with myself, super comfortable with spending time alone and being okay with being alone, it was a huge deal for me. It was a super big deal. Moving forward in this move was, I knew it was expected because the universe had been preparing me for it for a very long time. I think I had mentioned my sister had lived in France for many, many years. I started taking French when I was in high school. Like I had this affinity for France. I just knew I needed to be here. I knew I belonged here. But to actually finally do it and to do it within 6 months, I had literally made the decision I think it was the end of January. And by July 4th, I had moved here in 2019. It was very quick. It was a decision that was definitely divinely guided. Was it hard? Yeah, it was super hard. I went through a lot more dark nights of the soul. I can tell you that. So for the first 3 months to 4 months that I was here, it was tough. It was really tough. But it was just more layers. It was more layers that I needed to transmute, that I needed to look at, that I needed to dive into, whatever it happened to be, whatever issue I had to look at within myself. All of these experiences were showing them to me. It wasn't until about December of 2019 that, I settled into my apartment. I basically started meeting my soul family. Everything started falling into place. And then the pandemic hit, which, I could not believe that that's what was happening because basically I got here and all of a sudden we're not able to leave our houses. And believe it or not, it was another beautiful incubation space for me to be able to dive even deeper within my spiritual work. And so for almost 2 years, that's what I did. And of course, I started my business during that time and I started coaching and doing Akashic record readings and everything else. And it was such a beautiful, creative space for me. Now, I know it wasn't a beautiful space for many, many people, but for me personally, it was a really great time to be able to cultivate this aspect of my life. Like I said, the universe is going to make you stop if you're not going to stop and take a look at where you're supposed to be. Confinement and everything else that we went through was almost like a global collective timeout for everyone. Because if you look at some of the articles that have been coming out and that sort of thing, it's amazing how many people had their spiritual awakening or started their spiritual awakening during the confinement, during the pandemic. This is just a fraction of my story. How do you pack, 10, 20 years worth of a spiritual awakening into an hour podcast? Well, you don't. So this is just a little taste, basically, of what I went through, the difficulties I went through, the hardships, and then the beautiful experiences that I had with meeting people who were aligned with what I was doing and where I was going, realizing that I was not crazy and that, in fact, my intuition is spot on, even if the timing is a little wonky, and that my spiritual gifts are not only a gift to me, but they are a gift to everyone that I'm able to do sessions for. I love doing this work. It's so completely fulfilling to be able to help people through their awakening process. I know now that all of the experiences that I've had have basically been because I needed to help others through this process as well. And if you are one of those light workers out there who is in this same position, I tip my hat to you because it's not an easy journey. It isn't. It is hard. It is trying. You want to give up. It makes you angry and frustrated. But I can tell you right now, it is 100% worth it. Because even though I've gone through everything that I've gone through, I feel like I'm still learning brand new things every single day. The universe is teaching me new things all the time. And yeah, I still get triggered sometimes into that shadow. Yes, I still go into those parts of my experience that I thought, oh, I thought I was done with this. Well, no, some more stuff is coming up. Okay, cool. But now I have the tools to look at it. Now I have the tools to work through it. Now I have the tools to be able to move through it and transmute it or integrate it in a very, very easy and effective way. So stay tuned. Maybe, I don't know, in the next couple of seasons, I'll do a part 2 to my spiritual awakening story, because who knows what's going to happen in the next year or two. We're always evolving. We're always changing. And thank God for that. I would like to thank Paris Underground Radio for producing this episode. And if you would like to get in touch with me, you can reach me on my website at www.infinitesoullove.com. You can also follow me on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Infinite Soul Love 1111. If you are interested in meeting your Akashic guides, if you have been drawn to going into the Akashic records, you can head to my website and download a free meditation. So just go to my website and at the top, just click on it and you will be able to download it. Thanks for spending the time with me and allowing me to share my story with you. And stay tuned for next week's episode.
This episode of The Heart of You was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please join us on Patreon.